Welcome to the virtual tour of the SER-UW Nursery. Be sure to follow up with any questions or comments by emailing us at sernursery@gmail.com and check out our Instagram at SER-Nursery. I'll give a brief history of the SER-UW Nursery, but be sure to check out our website for a more in-depth history to learn about our mission as a student-run nursery, to see our volunteer events, and to buy plants too. So the SER-UW Nursery was started in 2013 by the UW chapter of Society for Ecological Restoration. The mission was to grow their own plants for restoration projects on campus for cost efficiency, horticultural education, and creating a closed loop of plant selection, plant growth, and plant installation at restoration sites. The nursery used only borrowed spaces in the greenhouse and other hoop houses at the Center for Urban Horticulture until 2015, when the SER-UW chapter was awarded a Campus Sustainability Fund grant to build our own hoop house. Every quarter, we host 2 to 3 nursery interns, 2 to 3 service learners, and we host weekly work parties for the public and all other students to come and learn about nursery operations. All the while, we provide plants for the SER-UW restoration sites on campus, capstone projects, and Masters of Environmental Horticultural students. Our main goals at the nursery are to provide hands-on horticultural experience for students and to grow and provide plants native to the Puget Lowland area in environmentally and economically friendly manners. The SER-UW Nursery is located at the Center for Urban Horticulture, which is one of 2 sites for the University of Washington Botanic Gardens. This hoop house is our main edifice where we do most of our work and keep most of our plants throughout the year. We call this building a hoop house because of the obvious hoop frame that structures the building, but also to differentiate from the greenhouse located at the Center for Urban Horticulture. The main difference between the two is that a greenhouse can be climate controlled, while our temperature and humidity inside the hoop house is determined by the ambient weather and the roof covering on the hoop house. So that roof covering, the plastic roofing that you see in the picture, we call it a poly cover. And we keep the poly cover on during winter to keep our plants from freezing. Being in a small pot can be pretty stressful for a plant during winter months where the media or soil is more likely to freeze than it would in the ground. So the poly cover can keep our plants about 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. It also does a great job at keeping the nursery team and volunteers a little warmer. This is the inside of our hoop house, where we have 5 benches on either side of the hoop house. Each can hold almost 200 individual gallon-sized pots, and the tables also have a bottom rack where we can keep more plants, tools, or extra materials. An important thing to note inside the hoop house is that we zone it horizontally from east to west to label our 2 zones, north and south. The south side is on the right and receives more sunlight and therefore is home to more of our sun-loving plants or drought-tolerant plants. The north side on the left houses our plants that are more shade-tolerant or even shade-loving. And here's what our hoop house looks like with shade cloth. We use shade cloth for 7 to 9 months of the year when we face less harsh winter conditions. This allows our plants to be watered by rainwater and protected from direct sunlight, but also to acclimate to the Pacific Northwest weather. In the front right of the picture, you can see our potting bench, where we and volunteers do a lot of our work, such as transplanting plants from a small to larger pot, dividing plants, sowing seeds, and the list goes on. In the front left, you see a lower bench, which we call our germination bench, and we keep our flats or trays of cones with recently sown seeds. And we keep the shade cloth rolled up on the south side of the hoop house to allow for even more sunlight to enter, which can fully accommodate certain species that are sun-loving. All right, let's move on to some projects outside of the hoop house. These are our beneficial insectary beds. These insectaries are full of native plants that predatory insects will use as habitat or as a food source. Many beneficial services will come from this. We will have native plants pollinated, and we will have predatory insects that will ideally come into our hoop house to hunt the pests, some of which include aphids and thrips. Species planted in this bed include Pearly Everlasting, which is clearly thriving and will actually have to weed a lot out this spring, Kinnikinnick, and our native nodding onion, Allium cernuum. And out here we have our wet beds and our sawdust beds, both of which are projects in renovation right now. The wet beds are used for plants that are grown in wetlands, riparian zones, swamps, or any other area where they keep their feet wet. Right now we If we were to put any plants out here, they would all have to be extremely tolerant of direct sunlight. But once we put up some shade cloth, we'll be able to have a larger variety of species that can live in these beds, shade tolerant or not. These beds work sort of similar to how a toilet works with this buoy. When the float reaches a certain low level, the water turns on and fills back up to reaching a certain high level and turns off. All the plants sit in their individual pots, and the pots sort of do the uptaking of water with how much ever water the media in the pot can hold. The greatest benefit of using these wet beds is to acclimate our plants as best as possible to the environment in which they'll eventually be planted. And another benefit is by having plants out here in these beds, we're able to clear up some more space in the hoop house, which can increase our overall amount of plants that we have, but also we can increase the space between individual pots, which is better cultural practices for pest management. And moving right along to the sawdust beds, we began renovation over here during winter quarter at a work party. Our hardworking and awesome volunteers helped us weed out blackberry, tree seedlings, scotch broom, and various herbaceous species. Last month we filled one of these beds with sawdust to store our bare root plants, and the sawdust just does a great job at both retaining moisture and providing support for our plants. We just bury the roots of the plants in the sawdust and then water the sawdust when needed, and then it's super easy to pull out the plants when we're ready to pot them up and sell them as they are. We keep the fencing around the bed to try to keep the bunnies out. We keep the shade cloth over the plants to protect them from direct sunlight, to hopefully prevent them from leafing out too much before they've been potted up or planted, and as another modest attempt to keep the bunnies out. Out here we have our raised beds. We currently have 3 projects happening in these, and the first project is our coppice gardens, which is a form of vegetative reproduction. We take 8 to 12 inch cuttings under a leaf node, treat the wound with rooting hormone, and keep the cutting in moist peat moss. And once the cutting has begun to root, we put the cutting in its own gallon pot, and a few months later it'll be ready to sell. This year was the first year we were able to take cuttings from these gardens, which we'll be able to see in the mist bench later when our tour goes into the greenhouse. The species in the order that they're shown are snowberry, which is Synthrocarpus albus, red osier dogwood, Cornucercia, black twinberry, Lonicera involucrata, and then Pacific ninebark, Physocarpus capitatus. Because this is a form of vegetative reproduction, all cuttings are genetically identical to the original plant, which is why we keep records of where our plants come from so one customer doesn't receive plants that are all genetically identical. The next project we have in these beds is our rhizome increase bed. Rhizomes are modified stem tissue that is horizontal and underground and grows new shoots above ground. It may look like you have 5 individual plants from above ground, but in reality these are all the same individual connected underground via rhizomes. Not all plants can grow vegetatively like this. We'll be able to make cuts along the rhizomes and pot the cuttings up with a higher yield of sellable plants per individual plant. These rhizome divisions would also be genetically identical. And we've sown 3 species out here, Aclis triphylla, Trillium ovatum, and Asarum caudatum. We're just waiting for them to germinate, which is why you don't see any plants yet. And the last project we have in the raised beds is our 4-year camas rotational beds. Camas is a flowering monocot prairie species and takes a particularly long time to flower, sometimes even up to 7 to 10 years. 2 years ago, we sowed this first bed with camas seeds. You can see an example of the flower here in this video. It's a vibrant purple and just really beautiful. Last year, we sowed the second bed, and we have a lot of growth here, but not as much as the last bed. And next to do on our to-do list is to sow the 3rd bed this year, and next year the 4th bed. We'll then be able to sell the first bed's camas so our customers can have flowering camas, and we'll re-sow that bed and continue that 4-year rotation. Okay, and now moving inside into the Douglas Research Conservatory, or the DRC. The DRC includes the head house and the greenhouse, which we'll see next. The head house is just a shared workspace for many groups, and we usually host our work parties here during winter quarter, where activities can include seed inventory, seed sowing, transplanting plants, just things we can do staying inside, warm and dry. Here's a tour through the greenhouse. Like I mentioned earlier, the greenhouse can be specified to different climates, and the greenhouse is divided into 3 zones, each with a different climate or temperature and humidity. Each zone is separated by the sliding door, just like the one we came through, and it's important to shut these doors behind us always to keep the zones climatized. The nursery occupies 2 benches in Zone 3. We keep germinating plants here during the winter, as well as plants that were uppotted, transplanted, or sown during the winter. Here are flats of germinating plants. We sow plants in flat trays when we know the germination rate of a particular species is low, or if we just don't know the germination rate. Transplanting a seedling from these flats to individual 164 milliliter cones is relatively easy, and this way we don't waste any media on cones that wouldn't have seen any germination success. Some species we see right now include Douglas fir, Pseudosugum zii, crevice alumroot, Heuchera micrantha, large-leaf lupin, Lupinus polyphyllus, and coast black gooseberry, Ribes divaricatum. Here we have 164 milliliter containers with a variety of species. We have a lot of kinnikinick, some more crevice alumroot. We have a lot of evergreen huckleberry, which is Vaccinia movatum. And in the back we have yarrow planted with some Castelia hispida, which is an Indian paintbrush species. They're planted together since the paintbrush is a hemiparasite, and yarrow would be the host for that. And some lupin in the back. And now going back to Zone 1, this is a mist bench that I said we would see when looking at our cuttings. The mist bench is used for a lot of susceptible plants beginning to root or grow from spores like ferns that need to stay moist. We keep our cuttings back here, and these cuttings that we took from the coppice garden back during winter quarter, we have kept them in peat moss and perlite, so easy draining but full of nutrients and pretty sterile media. They're misted every 4 seconds, every 15 minutes, and we should be able to pot these cuttings up any day now into gallon pots. Okay, and that about wraps up the virtual tour of the SER-UW Nursery. Thanks for watching the video. Please feel free to contact us with any questions at SERnursery@gmail.com. Look us up on Instagram at SER Nursery, and be sure to check out our website from the very beginning of the video.